Welcome everyone to week 4 of our pre-recorded lecture series for DES 114, Print Production and Color Theory. Again, I'm Shannon McNamara, an instructor here at Independence University and an FPA here as well. So we've made it to week 4. I hope that you all have really enjoyed this course. I say it every single time I get a chance to teach the course. This is one of my favorite courses to teach at Independence because I just think that there's so many great real world design problems that you are dealing with in this course. There's so much work that you're going to see out there in the field. So I really hope that everyone has made the most of everything that you were able to learn this mod. Here's our agenda for week 4. We're going to have a color theory review. We're going to talk about talking about color with your client, some design principles, branding in color, choosing a color palette, learning through looking at examples. We'll talk about linked images, pre-flight and packaging, and proofs and press checks. So our color theory review. As we discussed in week 1, color theory is a term used to describe the collection of rules and guidelines regarding the use of color in art and design. You know, it was developed during those early days, and color theory informs the design of color schemes. It's aiming at aesthetic appeal and the effective communication of a design message on both the visual level and the psychological level. Modern color theory is heavily based on Isaac Newton's color wheel, which displays 3 categories of color: your primary colors, that's red, blue, and yellow. Then you had those secondary colors, which were created by mixing 2 primary colors, and your intermediate or your tertiary ones, which again are created by mixing primary and a secondary color. Colors can be combined to form one of the 5 main color schemes that allow designers to achieve harmony in their designs. And those are analogous, based on 3 colors located next to each other on the color wheel; complementary, 1 or more pairs of colors that when combined, they cancel each other out or they produce a high contrast. Remember how we were saying that could be blue and orange or yellow and purple or red and green. Then you have that split complementary, which is a combination of the analogous and the complementary color schemes. That was that one where we went from, from green to red, but then we hop over one and we hop over one. So it would be green and red violet, and red orange would be our split complementary. Then we had our triadic, which uses 3 colors at equal distances from each other on the color wheel. And that was our Superman color theme I was saying, where you went red and then you hop 3. 1, 2, 3. Yellow, 1, 2, 3. And blue, 1, 2, 3, and back to red. We also discussed color temperature, and that's another vital consideration in design. By distinguishing between warm, cool, neutral colors, we apparently have the power, which is it's a pretty big power, to evoke emotional responses in people. Warm colors, those are those shades of yellow and red, and then cool colors have that blue, green, or even purple tint. Then we have some neutral colors, which are your browns, your grays, your black, and your white. While these groupings hold true in a general sense, emotional responses to colors can also be heavily affected by gender, experiences, cultural associations, and other personal factors. Consequently, researching the traits and expectations of a target audience is really vital for not only fine-tuning the positive impact of color use in design, but also preventing design failure. So again, you can kind of see right here on the color wheel, we have our warm colors, which are your red orange, your orange, your yellow orange, your yellow. even going into that yellow green. But I gotta be honest, I would almost, and this is a personal preference, you might agree with me, you might disagree with me, I might shift the yellow green to the cool colors and add a red violet to the warm color. But again, it depends on how you have mixed those colors to begin with. So again, something else to think about when you're putting it together. Sometimes your red violet might be a little bit different than my red violet, or your yellow green might have a whole lot more yellow in it than green. So you can see where what you can do as a designer. Again, you hold that power to kind of change up some of these colors. So talking about color with your client, explaining those color choices. So colors have associations with emotional states, symbolism, and cultural meaning. We facilitate a common understanding about colors. Color names are really just labels when we get to it. And then once the design has started to take off, we refer to the Pantone color numbers that you've chosen, but only after the color is set. You want to be sure to show color in context, and then designers choose color for a reason. So let's get into each of these. So again, how do we talk about color with our clients? How do we let them know why we've made these choices? Talking about color in identity design, it's always going to be a challenge. Beyond the physiological issues of color perception, colors have associations with emotional states, symbolism, and cultural meanings. And then you add to these factors the whole aspect of aesthetic preference. Color is a really loaded subject. It's deeply personal. It's experientially specific to the viewer. Yet color is universally accepted as a critical, important aspect of any design. So why? Well, because color attracts and it holds attention. It can convey information on conscious and subconscious levels. And it helps assist us in memorability. Ultimately, it's our job as a designer to clearly communicate with clients and colleagues and to facilitate a common understanding about color and its role in a brand's visual expression. Color names, they're just simply linguistic labels that people attach to hues. Hues are determined by the physics of light reflection. The most dominant visible wavelength of light determines its name. Despite the complex systems that determine a color, and go back to all those Pantone swatches that there were. How complex of a system was that when we were in there in week 2? Trying to match up some colors to, how many pinks showed up that were similar to our actual RGB value that we have. Talk about a complex system. Most colors are named by association. Either its relative position on the color wheel, such as, blue-green, or by reference to some natural object of that hue, such as turquoise. Both terms can be used to describe the same exact hue. Changes in saturation can be expressed by adding a modifying label to the name, such as vivid turquoise. To describe changes in value, a reference to intensity is added. So an example might be dark blue-green. And you can start to get a visual in your mind of what that color might look like. Special kinds of reflection provide added modification, like sparkling turquoise or opalescent aqua. Think of all the choices that you had when you were trying to put together a color scheme for aqua excursions, and you were trying to come up with a color, that's going to match the name aqua. And maybe you wanted to explain to the client that it was a vivid turquoise, like the ocean in the Bahamas, or like a lake in your area that people would be kayaking on. There's just so many reasons why and so many different ways that we can explain our color choices to our clients. So eventually, once we come up with a color, we can use the standardized color systems like the Pantone PMS numbers, which provide technical nomenclature and a shared language, especially for production conversations with our printers. If we said to our printer, we're looking for a dark blue-green or a vivid turquoise, they might have a different idea of what that is than us. But if we give them a PMS color value, they can look it up in the book and say, that one. So, that number isn't exactly the most evocative or convincing way to express a color's resonance and appropriateness for a brand when we're talking with a client. But in the design process, once the client has agreed to our particular color scheme, once they have agreed to our sparkling turquoise, then we can start to just refer to that color in its technical name or its system number, which will make a little bit more sense. With all these variations in the language of color, perhaps a designer's best strategy for discussing color and getting it approved, because remember, it's not just you. You have to win over your client each time, and get that approval. It might be to show that color in context. Talk with your client through a color palette using names that link back to the choices, of their desired objective. So for example, this handsome deep blue was chosen because it conveys a sense of tradition and strength, which I feel is right for your financial services company. Also, as designers, we should present their color choices as a well-considered system. Show your client the entire proposed color palette by applying it to various types of materials. This shows the client how the colors interact, and it provides confirmation that you've thought holistically about their color system. Always speak about how your color choices meet the creative brief and therefore your client's goals. If the client's direction is that the brand should appear young and modern, explain that this proposed color scheme is just that. If a client objects to a color, which may happen, it's going to happen a lot, try and get them to really address the problem exactly. If color is an overarching issue, for example, the client hates blue, but blue is the cornerstone of the branding. You need to know why they hate blue. Is it a personal preference, or does the client actually believe that blue is sending the wrong message? That's what you need to do. You need to ask the appropriate questions to get at the root of the problem. Do they agree that blue should be the dominant color, but maybe they just don't like that particular blue that you've chosen? Tease out the parameters of your client's objection so you can either defend your choice or you can just completely scrap it, move on, and select a different color. The bottom line's this, as designers, we choose colors for a reason, and we need to be able to effectively communicate our color selections to our client and use an accurate and expressive color name. By doing that, that will support this effort that we're trying to make. If you can use the project brief to support your color choices, they're going to end up seeming less arbitrary to the client, and they'll be more likely to meet with your client's approval. Branding and color. Remember, people see color before they absorb anything else. Brands and colors are inextricably linked because color offers an instantaneous method for conveying meaning and message without any words. Color is the visual component that people remember most about a brand, followed closely by shapes, symbols, maybe some numbers, and finally, the words. Isn't that funny? We might remember the name last because those are the words. Many of the most recognizable brands in the world rely on color as a key factor in their instant recognition. Research has reinforced that 60% of the time, People will decide if they're attracted to or not attracted to a message based on color alone. And color increases brand recognition by up to 80%. So I probably don't need to tell you which one is the correct McDonald's logo. I'm sure you can tell. It's this one right here. Because you know based on the color. But here's a challenge for you. The next time you're in a grocery store, I want you to look at the colors of laundry detergent. An overwhelming majority are blue and orange. You may have never thought of this before, but somewhere they have blue or somewhere they possibly have orange on them. Know why? The blue symbolizes cleanliness and the orange is dynamic energy. Therefore, a blue and orange package would clearly communicate industrial strength, cleaning power. Tide's packaging, right here, employs both colors. Also, blue and orange are complementary. You may notice on this bottle that there isn't an equal amount of blue and orange in the packaging. Orange is definitely the dominant color, while blue is the accent color. So this ends up toning down that complementary color scheme, which we've always talked about, that can be jarring to the eyes if it's not properly implemented. And then Downy, there's just something about the Downy, but again, paired with a nice pink, where it's not really saying industrial strength cleaning power, but it does have the word ultra in there, doesn't it? All right, choosing a color palette. So how do we even start the process of choosing a color? Well, we can start with color psychology. We can understand common color associations, and then we can move on to specific tones, tints, and shades. Again, color is such a powerful communication tool. It's often used by designers to encourage action, influence mood, and tap into our emotions. It's a tool that gets your audience to see what you want them to see and to feel what you want them to feel, and many times to do what you want them to do. Think about those call to actions. Click here, add to cart, buy now. Half the time we're like, ooh, that is a good deal. Maybe I will just add it to my cart. And if it's already in your cart, chances are good you might just buy it, right? So again, let's go back to that statistic I keep bringing up. 60% of people will decide whether or not they're attracted to a message based on color alone. So how you use color also affects the visibility of the brand, and it reinforces the brand recognition up to 80%. If you want to create a color palette that attracts your ideal audience and accurately represents your brand, you have to have a basic understanding of color psychology. So we went over this, in massive detail, but again, let's take a look at some of the common color associations. Yellow is a go-to color for positivity, happiness, warmth. This color is attention grabbing, which might explain why taxis are yellow, but it can also represent caution. Yield signs, traffic lights. A yield sign is yellow. You might have to slow down. A yellow light, oh, it's about to turn red. You might have to slow down. You're going to have to slow down and come to a stop pretty soon. Blue is perceived as trustworthy, loyal, dependable, serene. It's a really popular color with financial institutions. IBM, Citibank, Chase, also social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, due to its message of stability and trust. And think about it, there's been a lot in the news about social media and hacking and whether or not they're, really being using your information correctly or storing your information correctly. Yet here they have, Facebook has a blue logo. They're trying to instill trust. They're using the color of trust. Blue is also a really popular color for promoting products related to cleanliness. So water purification filters, detergents, that Downy bottle, air and sky, airlines, air conditioners, water and sea. Think of, cruise lines, bottled water. The color, however, it's usually avoided in restaurant logos and food packaging because it's thought to suppress appetites. But who does use it? Weight Watchers. The Weight Watchers logo is blue. Studies have also shown that blue is the preferred color of men. And you have to wonder if it's just been years of marketing where men's products were constantly made blue, that now you have just generation after generation after generation of men who say, well, blue's a boy's color, right? Green, however, the color of nature. It symbolizes growth, freshness, serenity, healing. It has a strong emotional correspondence to safety and balance. Darker greens, though, they're closely related to money, banking, and wealth, while lighter greens have a calming effect. So this green on the screen is kind of a lighter green. I didn't want to go with a really jarring dark green and not have you be calm during my presentation. Some common associations with green can include freshness, harmony, health, eco-friendliness, healing, but also in experience, money, and then also nature. So it's kind of interesting, let's think of a couple of things that are green. Recycling bins, those are usually green, whereas your trash receptacles are a different color. Food packaging, that anything that says all natural or healthy or, anything that's supposed to be good for you, it usually has green in the packaging. Anything that's fresh, the word fresh always shows up in green. You wouldn't see the word fresh in bright red or orange, pink. It's just not the color that you would usually associate with that. Harmony, lots of, yoga studios they usually have a light green and maybe a light blue palette, that those two colors, again, working in harmony together. And it's also on its way to being an analogous color scheme. Next, we have purple. So purple is closely associated with royalty, nobility, luxury, extravagance. It's a very rare color in nature, and many relate it to creativity and mystery. But it's also said to stir up feelings of nostalgia. So some common associations with purple might include fantasy, mystery, nobility, royalty, and sophistication. But, going back to that, a rare color in nature, lilacs, think of the different flowers that you see that are purple, and there's not a ton of them. So, it really is that luxury or that extravagance when you have something purple. Then we have red. Red's the color of fire and blood, so it's often associated with energy, war, danger, and power, but also passion, desire, and love. It's an emotionally intense color. There's no denying that. It has really high visibility, and it's often used to grab viewers' attention. Every time you see those red tag clearance sales or buy now buttons, they are red. They know that they're gonna stand out. You're gonna see them. Red has also been known to raise people's blood pressures and to stimulate appetite. So it's frequently used by food industry brands like Nabisco, Kellogg's, Frito-Lay, Heinz, McDonald's, and Chick-fil-A. I always say, next time you go to a restaurant, and especially a chain restaurant, I want you to look over the menu, and I want you to look over the items on the menu. How many of them are in red? The big bold red letters, the different items that they want you to order. Or if it's a special, one of their signature items, it shows up in red. Try to see how many times you see that. Just try to pay attention the next couple of times that you go to different restaurants and see how red is used in those menus. Some other common associations with red would include action, adventure, aggression, blood, danger, drive, energy, excitement, love, passion, and vigor. It's it's definitely a common color to be used for breaking news. Every single breaking news banner for every single TV news network in red, right? Because, danger, breaking news, or maybe it's good breaking news. We'll never know until they tell us what the breaking news is. Then we have orange. Orange is less intense than red, but it still definitely packs a lot of punch. It's energetic, it's warm. Like yellow, orange is associated with joy, sunshine, playfulness, and you often find it in logos to stimulate emotions or even appetites. And I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The Walmart logo is blue, but the Walmart grocery logo is in orange now. So again, stimulating appetite, maybe that's why they decided to change the blue, which can suppress appetites, change it to orange for the Walmart grocery logo. And that way, maybe they think that you'll buy more groceries that way. Who knows? It might have been one of the reasons why. Some common associations with orange include creativity, enthusiasm, lightheartedness, affordability, and youth. Very interesting. An interesting combination of adjectives for orange. Then we have pink. So again, kind of like we say blue is a boy's color, pink has been, given the definition of being a feminine color that conjures feelings of innocentness and delicateness. However, bright and vibrant shades of pink often evoke a bold and modern appeal. Overall, pink is known to be friendly and lighthearted. Common associations with pink might include gratitude, romance, gentleness, innocence, softness, and appreciation. Then we have brown. Brown indicates nature and utility, and it's often used in logos related to construction and law due to its simplicity, warmth, and its neutrality. You would probably want to have a law logo and remain neutral. Common associations with brown include depth, earthiness, roughness, richness, simplicity, seriousness, subtlety, and utility. Then there's black. Black represents power, elegance, and authority. It's often associated with intelligence, but it's also associated with evil and grieving. It's a serious color that evokes seriously strong emotions. Common associations with black include authority, class, distinction, formality, mystery, secrecy, seriousness, elegance, and tradition. Then once we've picked a color, we have those tones, tints, and shades, and they often affect how we end up perceiving the color that we've picked. So tones are created by adding that black and white to pure colors. You often hear people say that a color needs to be toned down, meaning it's too intense, and they want you to drop the level of intensity. Adding different amounts of black and white to a color can subdue the intensity. Then you have tints of colors that are created by mixing a pure color with white. They often convey a lighter, more peaceful, and less energetic feel, and they're also considered to be, you guessed it, more feminine. Then we have shades. So shades of color are created by mixing a pure color with black. They communicate a more mysterious, dark feel, and they're often considered to be, another guess, more masculine. All right, learning through looking at examples. So let's take a look at the different steps for, again, choosing our colors. Step one, gather some color inspiration. This is the fun part. You know, after going over the color associations one more time, you might have an idea of at least one or two colors that would be fitting for your client's brand, right? You know, you've kind of narrowed it down, and if they're maybe an insurance firm. So you're thinking to yourself, well, I definitely want to go with some blues, you know, because I know what blue means, and the stability and, you know, being able to just, hopefully people will think that it's not a non-aggressive color. I don't want to go with red because of that. You know, it's dependable and it's supposed to be trustworthy. So yeah. All right. My insurance company, definitely, I'm going to go with blue. So you've made that decision. You know, why not create a secret board on Pinterest and look for images that incorporate those different feelings that you have? You know, pin images to the board that represent the same look and feel that you think that this brand evokes. Remember, this goes back to the brand. This is not your personal preference. It doesn't matter if you like blue or not. That's not why you're choosing it. You'll more than likely begin to see a trend in the colors that you gravitate towards. And as you continue to fill up your board with inspirational images, begin to look for color similarities. And if you're having trouble coming up with some initial colors, you can also look at designinspiration.net and you know, Adobe Color CC. So let's take a look at designinspiration.net for a second. This is a great site for both color and design inspiration, which is probably why they named it that. You can search for designs that include certain colors by clicking on the color tab. Oh, there it is right here at the top of the website. Beware though, it's really easy to get sucked into lose track on this site. So, you know, let's start by blue. Oh, we've got some awesome images here that come up. And again, just some inspiration that we're looking for. Orange and blue. That's kind of funny. Another, you know, orange and blue right here. Blue in something that's orange, the word blue. And I can see where you would just get lost scrolling through this. Like, what a great image. You know, what a great pop of color there. It's so awesome. And then go back. There's tons of things here. Just some great design images here. Great furniture design too. I love good furniture design. So again, you know, if you're looking for some inspiration, you can even follow them on Instagram. I would definitely do that. I mean, we all spend so much time just on our phones, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, right? So much more time than we should be spending. So why not follow sites like this, and you can actually be productive at the same time. You can get some inspiration when you're just kind of stuck in a rut, and it happens to all of us. We all get stuck in a rut. So again, you know, just kind of look through. There we go. Logo design, branding. Oh, these are some great inspiration here. And if you're having trouble, you know, at any point coming up with a logo, or, you know, kind of stopping yourself from going too far, this would be a great site to check out. Although color-wise, again, talk about way too much gradient. That would not work. So not everything's going to be like the best, all the rules followed, but you can see where there's some, some great options here to look for. This is a very famous turn and turn logo, the Volkswagen logo. Just some great stuff to kind of go over here. And again, Adobe Color CC is another great resource that allows you to look through different, through different color rules. You can create and save palettes. You can even look at pre-existing color palettes that are up there. So if we go to color.adobe.com, we can actually explore and check out other people's color palettes. Go to most popular. This is a great color palette. Life's a Beach. Some Pantone colors, 2019. Coral and Dust. What a great name for a color palette, right? Coral and Dust. Oh, I love that. If you like something, you can appreciate it. I'm going to give them an appreciation, not only for the color scheme, but definitely for the great naming convention. So again, just some, some great inspiration here if you're having a hard time. Look and see, what's already out there. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. So, all right, you've found some great inspiration, you've gathered it all together. The next thing you're going to do is pull 5 colors for your color palette. Why 5? Well, because Adobe Color is going to set up 5 colors for you, so it's really the best tool to use, and there's 5 spots to fill. So that's why I say pull 5 colors. Keep in mind, the colors you choose during this step, they're simply a starting place. You're going to continue to revise and refine your color palette as you go. In week 2, we started out, I started out with an Adobe Color palette, but I altered it as I went. I wasn't steadfast. This cannot change. I must use this color palette. It was just simply a good jumping off position to start with. So keep that in mind. All right, step 2, you're going to determine your color combinations that you're starting with. The color wheel plays a big role in how you develop a color palette for your brand. There are 3 different color combinations that can be formed with those 5 colors that you started with. You can do a monochromatic color palette. You can do as many tints and shades of a single color that you can come up with. They're soft and subtle, but they might make your brand appear washed out because of that lack of contrast. If your 5 colors that you picked are all tints and shades of one color, here's an idea. Consider switching it up by adding in one other color from the color wheel, just one other color. Keep 4 tints and shades of that one blue, but maybe we add in an orange. Maybe we add in a yellow with it, right? Just that little pop of contrast by doing that. You might have an analogous color palette, which involves, colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. They're related, they're a family of colors, and they create a pleasing, relaxed palette. And again, analogous color palettes usually include all of the cool colors or all of the warm colors. So depending on the look and feel that you're trying to achieve with your brand, maybe you'd want to choose to add one complementary color of your 5 colors. Just to help the brand stand out a bit more and become more distinct. So what if we had, a yellow green, a green blue, and a blue, and then we had one vivid red to go with it, or one vivid orange to go with it. That might work. Then we have complementary colors, which are opposite each other on the color wheel. So they're both warm and cool colors. You know, consider which color combination you're currently starting with. Is it monochromatic? Is it analogous? Is it complementary? But also consider this, you know, does that work for the overall direction of the brand? Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you just say, I like these colors. You need to realize that it needs to work for the brand you're designing for. You have to take it's hard for us sometimes to step back and take ourselves out of the equation. And if you know, you realize, ooh, it doesn't work for the brand, you need to make some adjustments as needed. You know, if your 5 colors are monochromatic, again, adding colors that are next to your main color on the color wheel to transform it into a relaxed, understated, analogous palette, or add a color that's opposite your main color to transform it into a balanced, vibrant, monochromatic palette, that might be the way to go. If your 5 colors are all warm, analogous colors, but you're hoping for a creative palette with a little bit more dimension, add that one cool color from the other side of the color wheel, or vice versa. And again, if your 5 colors are complementary, but you're going for something a little less vibrant, maybe a little bit more understated and refined, you might consider taking out some colors from the other side of the color wheel, so that way they do become more warm, you know, more on the warm side or more on the cool side. Next, step 3, include both light and dark tones. One of the biggest mistakes that designers who are new to brand design and new to color theory encounter is that their color palette has a lack of contrast. A strong color palette is going to include a balanced mix of light, medium, and dark tones, regardless of whether it uses a monochromatic, analogous, or a complementary color scheme. So you want to keep that in mind. Again, take a look at your 5 colors. Do you have at least one dark neutral in the mix? If not, add black to one of the colors and create a darker shade, or replace one of your existing colors with a darker color. Just jump in there and do it. Do you have at least one light color in the mix? If not, add white to at least one of your colors, or add a lighter shade to replace one of the existing colors in your color scheme. You know, make adjustments to your palette to ensure that the colors you're using include an array of light and dark tones to not only add contrast, but to give you more versatility when you're implementing your brand into different packaging and different print items and the website that you might create. Then step 4, choose a dominant and an accent color. Whoops, I have this as access. Let me fix that slide for you. That is not correct. Accent color. That is where spell check will get you. After setting a color combination and a good mix of light and dark tones, it's time to decide on 1 to 3 dominant colors and possibly 3 to 5 secondary colors. So you definitely won't use every color in your palette for each item, you know, your logo variations or the pages of your website, but you'd want to determine which colors will be used most often and which might be used just as accent colors. Remember how we settled in week 2 on a 3-color color scheme for our logo, and then we pared that down to 2 colors for special purposes? That's kind of what you're doing here, between 1 to 3 dominant colors, and then you might have some other colors that you just might use knowing that they go well with those 1 to 3 colors that you've picked. So again, do you have to use all 5 colors? No, of course not. You're free to add more or less colors depending on the aesthetic that you're trying to achieve. However, knowing the fundamentals of contrast, color combinations, and dominant and accent colors, that's really going to be helpful in, you know, being intentional about the brand and creating a streamlined, versatile color palette. All right, So now that we've discussed all of the color theory and the reasons and how we've, selected some color, let's get again into the whole technical aspect of everything, which is always fun. All right, linked images or things that you need to double check. Your raster artwork, the resolution, the file extensions, the color space, retouching, rotation and scaling, file names, your vector artwork, colors, images, fonts, text, bleeds, your page layout files, proofread, delete the extra junk, delete double spaces, check for scaling and rotation, provide printouts of your job, pre-flight your job, and ultimately, and this is a big one, have realistic expectations. So it's really important that your images that are raster based are the sufficient size for your piece. We went over that so many times doing all those different examples. Also, be sure that you have the file saved in the appropriate format. Have you changed those JPEGs to either a TIFF file or a PSD file? A slight note, your raster files should not be saved as PDF files. Sometimes I do see this in student work. Keep it saved as an AI file. Check your images in Photoshop. Consult your print service provider to make sure that you know their requirements too. But I do have some general guidelines for you that will help you out. When it comes to resolution, again, raster images for print need to be at least 300 dpi at their final imaging size for offset printing. With that being said, and these are special instances that this may happen, and your printer would let you know before one of these instances come up. But it may be necessary to create images of higher resolution for what is called high line screen work, which is 200 lines per inch or higher. And this usually occurs with extremely high resolution printers. So those really high digital printers that we were talking about. Some of them print at 1200 DPI. If you're creating images for special printed pieces, such as art books or art prints, you would probably be asked to supply those images at higher than 300 DPI. And again, keep in mind that it's best if the original scan or digital photograph was of adequate size and resolution. You can't just scale something up to 1200 DPI if you don't have the size to accommodate that. Scaling up or increasing resolution through interpolation never produces results equivalent to a healthy original image. I always say this, you can't add more pixels. You just can't do it. Next, you have your color space. Images usually come in one of 5 major flavors for printing purposes. You have your CMYKs, you have your RGBs, you have your grayscale, and monochrome, which might be bitmap, black and white, with no shades of gray, or a duotone image. Unless you're working in a color managed environment, you're going to be asked to provide CMYK images for your color images. If your print service provider utilizes color management, ensure that you've tagged your RGB images with the appropriate color profile. It is extremely rare that you will run into this. I'm not saying it's never going to happen. It's just really rare that you're going to run into this. Also, and this is a big one, make sure that your grayscale images are truly black and white only files, not gray appearing RGB or CMYK files. If anything shows up on a different plate, on a cyan plate, on a magenta plate, on a yellow plate, again, you run that risk of being charged for those extra plates or having the plates thrown out and part of your image does not print correctly and it looks fuzzy. So you're gonna need to go into Photoshop and change your image mode to grayscale to make sure it truly is grayscale. If they have color in them, This is going to result in too many plates coming through during the pre-press stage. And again, that can mean plates are thrown away, part of your image won't print, or the printer's going to charge you for both the plates and fixing your incorrect files. Next is retouching. So we've all done some retouching. Think of DES 104. That's where you first got into Photoshop and you started to do some retouch work there. But some people, they are just more comfortable than other people doing, performing retouching work. It's as simple as that, and that's fine. If you're not comfortable performing retouching work beyond simple blemish removal, let your print service provider know that you'd like their staff to perform the work instead. It's helpful if you print the images in question and then you mark up the problems that you'd like them to fix. It is extremely likely that you're going to incur additional job charges for that service, but sometimes that charge is worth it to keep your client happy and keep them coming back to you. All right, next is rotations and scaling. So you'll achieve the best results if your scans or digital photographs are created at the proper size and rotation for final use. But let's be a little bit realistic here. You can't always anticipate how you'll use an image. You just simply can't. If you've, simply flipped an image horizontal or vertical in a page layout, don't really worry about that. That's fine. But if you've rotated an image by increments of 90 degrees, don't worry about that either. But if you've rotated an image on a layout by anything other than 90 degrees and scaled it, or if you've done both together, if you've got a whole lot of things going on with that image, you might see some slight softening of detail in the final output. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's not going to ruin anything, but just kind of keep that in mind. Now, this might be something that you might not have thought about. File names. Avoid using periods, asterisks, or any other character to drive files to the top of the directory. And also be mindful of characters that can cause problems when going cross-platform. Even if you and your print service provider are both using Macs, remember that your files may be copied to a server based on Unix or Windows. I worked for a company. It was completely Mac-based in the art department. But once files got to the pre-press stage, they were sent over to the world's most archaic PC from an era that was long gone. And if files were named a little bit weirdly, they corrupted on the way over. And we would have to go back over to the Macs, resave them, take out any weird periods, asterisks, or characters out of the file name in order for it to rip on those machines. All right, checking your vector artwork. So, Illustrator allows you to place raster images as content. You have to consider some of the issues that you encounter in page layout applications. So don't forget to check the following. Colors, or mainly correct colors. If you're placing vector art into a page layout program, try to avoid multiple instances of what should be one single spot color. So if the job uses Pantone 384, for example, make sure that the color isn't called 384C in Illustrator and then maybe called PMS 384CVC in InDesign. Make sure that you have a consistency in your naming across all your files. That's where using the CC libraries is really going to come into play, because if you can pull that information from the CC library, you know that it's the same across, all of your different platforms. Check your images. Illustrator offers a choice of embedding or linking placed images. Embedding does increase the file size, so just keep that in mind. And it ensures that all the pieces are in place. However, it may limit editing if your printer needs to modify the image. If you anticipate the need to color correct or retouch images placed in Illustrator, send the image files along just to be safe. As long as the printer is using the Creative Cloud version of Illustrator, the image can be unembedded easily for editing. All right, this is a big one, fonts. Embed fonts or outline text. note that while Illustrator enables the embedding of fonts with proper permissions, this only facilitates correct imaging. The fonts are not available for text editing unless you, the user, or in this case, the printer, also has the fonts activated on their system. If you're tempted to convert text to outlines, be advised that some text effects, such as underlining or strike-throughs, those could be lost when you convert the outlines to text, so you're going to need to watch for that. Another consequence of outlining text to consider is that fonts contain special information called hinting, which is lost when text is converted to outlines. And as a result, outline text, it might not be as crisp as the original text when it's printed on a desktop printer. However, on a high-resolution output device, such as an image setter or a plate setter, outline text will be more than satisfactory. And there really is a big plus for outlining your fonts. Sometimes printers will use their version of a font, which might be just slightly different than your version of a font. This happens many times with the fonts Helvetica and Futura. There are so many different versions of Helvetica and Futura out there that many people figure, oh, well, I already have Helvetica or I already have Futura on my machine, and they won't load your version of it. But even the slightest difference can cause your perfectly laid out body copy to bump a few words to the next line, or maybe perhaps put a hyphen where you didn't want it. I read a great article a while ago about how 99% of designers probably do not have the actual version of Futura on their machine. So this tells you something about the font industry and what's happening when people are redrawing fonts and uploading them as the original. That 99% of designers who think they have Futura on their machine are not using the correct version of Futura as it was originally drawn. Isn't that crazy? Another big item, text. Yes, all of the text. Make sure you proofread and you run spell checks on your content. And check for those pesky little empty remnants of text where you might have accidentally clicked with the type tool in Illustrator. It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us all the time. Those clicks will actually create empty point text entries, which might end up resulting in pre-flight reports of a font being needed, but that font is actually not used anywhere in the design. So it can be really a time waster trying to troubleshoot something like that isn't actually a problem if the font isn't used anywhere else. All right, next we have the bleed. Ensure that you've included an adequate bleed if any artwork goes to the edge of the artboard. Make sure you're extending at all four sides your bleed lines. Make sure of that. Then we have checking those page layout files. So at each step of the process, through your design changes and the proofing stages at the printer, there are multiple opportunities for things to go awry. I'm not trying to scare you. It's the nature of the beast. While you're focused on kerning an important headline over the cover and getting that just right, it's so easy to overlook a typographical error on the last page of body copy, because guess what? We all get tired. We have looked at this so many times that it's all blurring together in our brains. But those are the tiny errors that lead to expensive problems. You know, tunnel vision, it's completely unavoidable. It happens, especially when you're working in complex projects. That's why proofreading is so important. It's also helpful, really helpful, to solicit input from someone who hasn't been staring at this job as long as you have. An innocent bystander will often spot an error that you've missed and say, you know what, hey, this looks great, but shouldn't there be a picture in this big empty white box right here? You've been so busy looking at the text, we completely forgot to put the main photo on the page. It happens. Once you've determined that your raster images and your vector artwork pieces are healthy, you still need to examine any page layout file that combines that content to make sure that additional errors are not introduced. So don't forget to do the following. Proofread. It's really important to weed out those typing errors, but you need to be particularly careful with product names and proper names, because spell check's not going to catch that. You need to check for those mistakes that spell checkers just don't catch, such as grammatical errors or words that are spelled correctly but aren't what you intended. I had one on my last slide. I had access colors instead of accent colors. Clearly one of those times where spell check wasn't going to catch that. You don't want to go to press with a headline that reads, "The clam before the storm," rather than "the calm before the storm." Delete extra junk. We probably all have extra junk just floating around on the sides of our files. Clean off that pasteboard off to the side. Eliminate any empty elements. Again, this will help you to fix any missing font issues, missing image issues. You're not using them. You know, that one picture that's way off to the side, but it's still going to come up missing in the file when they open it. Delete double spaces. This is a big one. If you're still typesetting with a typewriter, you would use double spaces, but you're not. We do not use a typewriter in our work. Double spaces in computer typesetting are large, airy gaps. So you want to perform a find and replace. So find anything, hit 2 spaces, replace it with, hit 1 space. And then quit hitting that space bar. If you've used double spaces in folios to separate page numbers from your footer text, you can replace them with an M space. You can actually do a Google search to see the specific key codes for what an M space is. Do all of this before you generate a table of contents, so your text reflow doesn't render an existing table of content invalid. You want to, again, check for scaling and rotation. While a few rotations here and there aren't a problem, it's permissible to scale within a reasonable range, 70 to 125%. An image-heavy document with lots and lots of transformations can be slow to rip. And again, ripping is what occurs at the pre-press stage on what might be an archaic PC from a time long, long ago. So especially if you're greatly reducing many large images, consider doing those transformations in Photoshop and then updating the images in InDesign so they can be handled without all of those extra rotations. Remember when I showed you that PDF last week? I believe it was last week. And it started to, or it might have been week 2 with the poster, because I had all of those layers, but I wasn't using the layers, and the PDF started to draw itself on the screen and it showed all those layers I wasn't actually using. That's what's going to happen when it's sent over to RIP. So you're going to want to go through and just, that's part of that extra junk you're going to want to delete. Also, provide printouts of your job. They're really helpful to the CSRs, the planners, the estimators, and the pre-press operators at the printer for quick visual aids. You know, it's best if a printout is actual size, but if your piece is too large to print at final size, or you really just don't feel like tiling the output and taping all of those pieces of paper together, just mark the printout prominently with the scale factor. This is especially important if your printer will be scanning transparencies or other artwork for you. The scanner operator will need to measure your transparencies, measure your printouts, and then determine the proper scale factor for each image. If you indicate the scale factor used in your printout, you reduce the chance for error by alerting the scanner operator and by providing an important factor in the scaling equation. And then last but not least, have some realistic expectations. You know, your monitor and your desktop printer's approximation of the final printed piece might be fairly good if you've calibrated your monitor and you're using a high-end printer with careful color management. Otherwise, You have to wait for contract proofs from the print service provider to have a good idea of the appearance of the final output. All right, pre-flight and packaging. Understand what your printer needs from you and how they want you to get it there. So we're going to discuss some PDF submissions, pre-flighting all your documents, following your printer's specifications, embedding fonts, ensuring a safe transit for your files, packaging all your files appropriately, understanding, some printers may be using older or even more updated software than you. Understand platform issues from Mac to PC or PC to Mac, and then asking how to send those files. So first, let's talk submitting PDF files. If the printer requests that you submit PDF files, they should give you specifications for creating those PDF files, or recommend using a standard such as PDF, X4. That's an option that you'll find in InDesign when you're exporting the PDF. Pre-flight your PDFs before submitting. Even if you performed a pre-flight on the application file that generated the PDF file, it's a good idea to pre-flight the PDF files themselves. The print production tools in Acrobat Professional, they offer extensive pre-flighting features. Also, follow your print service provider specifications. Faithfully follow the specifications that are provided for creating those PDF files. Restrict your PDF to the version that your printer requests. That is, don't send them an Acrobat 9.0 file if they've asked you for an Acrobat 4.0 file. Ask the print service provider to send you a PDF job options file, which would be labeled and saved as .job options, so you can easily create the correct type of PDF for their workflow. Again, you need to work with them. Creative Cloud applications share a common repository of PDF creation settings, and importing the options into any of those applications makes those settings available to other Creative Cloud applications. So Adobe really makes this easy for you. Again, embed those fonts. By default, Illustrator and InDesign, they correctly embed fonts in generated PDFs. Although it's uncommon, if you've used fonts whose vendor forbids embedding or forbids supplying the font separately, you must either request that the printer provide, or purchase the same fonts, or you're going to have to substitute fonts that can be embedded. So you need to consult the end user license agreement for your fonts to make sure that you're in compliance. And every font that you find online should give you an end user license agreement. Ensure a safe transit. Even though it's easy to think of PDF files as being kind of hermetically sealed, they can sometimes be corrupted when they're sent as email attachments, unless they're first compressed and zipped. So encasing the PDF files in a compressed archive protects them in transit. It's kind of like bubble wrapping them. If you're submitting the job on digital media, this isn't an issue and you don't need to compress the PDF files, but just kind of keep that in mind. Packaging application files. It isn't sufficient to send only your finished page layout file to the print service provider. The page layout file is like a recipe for your printed piece, and a recipe isn't too much good without all the necessary ingredients. The fonts and images used in your page layout are the ingredients, and you need to supply all those, parts for your printer to be able to complete your job. While you're working on your project, you may be using images and vector art stored in multiple locations on your hard drive or on a server. Graphic files are simply linked to your InDesign file, and they're referenced by the InDesign file, as are the fonts that you've used. So by default, images and vector art components, they're not embedded in that InDesign file. So the graphics and fonts need to be gathered up to constitute a complete kit for your project. While it's possible to embed images and vector art, doing so really adds to that file size of your InDesign file. Fortunately, InDesign provides methods for gathering up all the necessary images and vector files as well as the fonts. So when you're sure all your work is in good shape, use that package function in both InDesign or Illustrator, and it makes it easy to gather up all the necessary pieces for printing a file, including any linked graphics and necessary fonts. If you're in InDesign or Illustrator, you simply choose File, Package. And let's just do a, we've done this a couple of times, but let's just do a quick demo of that. So let me open up a file. We don't need this one from last week. We'll go to this file right here. So once it's done, I'm positive it looks great. I'm ready to send it to the printer. File, package. As simple as that. That's all I have to do. And it's going to take everything, it's going to put it all together, and it's literally going to do that. It's going to make a nice little package that has my IDML file, my InDesign file, my PDF file, any of my fonts, except any fonts that are linked through Adobe Typekit. It will not add those. So what will happen is when your printer opens up a file that uses a Typekit file, it will actually prompt your printer to load that font directly from Adobe Typekit. And it tells you exactly what font it is, and it allows you to do it right within the program. It will also have all of the links used in that file. So again, that's how you would package that. If you are in Illustrator, you would do the same exact thing. File, package, and you'll tell it where to go. And then just click the package button. Easy peasy. Adobe, sometimes they get things right, and they make it a little bit easier for you. So at this point though, let's be honest, you should have been packaging your files since your first poster design in week 2. But before you exercise the package feature in InDesign or Illustrator, again, you want to make sure that all your necessary fonts are active. So you go to Type, Find Font, and make sure that they're all showing up and that all of your graphics are linked. So you would go to Window, Links, make sure that nothing's missing, nothing needs to be updated, and then carefully examine the package job folder. Again, that final package for an InDesign or an Illustrator file should contain the following components. It should have the InDesign or Illustrator file in it. It should have files for all the graphics, including all raster images and all vector artwork. Also include any raster images that have been placed in vector drawings from Illustrator, unless you embedded the images in Illustrator. It should have all the necessary fonts, including those needed by supporting art, such as Illustrator or Photoshop files. Be mindful, of those end user licenses for the fonts that you've used. Some forbid supplying the fonts to your print service provider. Next, let's discuss how to handle, layered image files. If you've created any elaborate compositions with multi-layered Photoshop files, which, we do that all the time, right? You might have chosen to use a flattened, simplified version of the image in InDesign when you placed it. But you should include the layered working file, the PSD file, with your job. You know, the flattened image might be your final file, but if the printer needs to make any corrections to that image, it's way easier for them to modify your PSD file by working with those layers in Photoshop rather than working with your flattened image. So keep that in mind, that unless, you know, the Photoshop file is just so enormous, or seriously, if you want to thwart any easy editing, you know, there's really no need to flatten it before placing it into InDesign. And there's really no need to squash Illustrator files even into a single layer. So just kind of keep that in mind. But there is a big thing that you need to always be aware of: version issues. Software, especially the Creative Cloud, is constantly being updated. You want to make sure the printer knows which version of, you know, of InDesign you're using. If you like to upgrade your software the minute the new software is released, don't assume that your printer is quite so avid. You might find that printers would, or you might think that printers would be the first to update their software, but they're just like many users. They don't update software until they really, really have to. So really keep that in mind. This leads to another important thought. If you're using an earlier version of software than the printer, this may also present problems if the printer needs to perform any corrections to your files and then return them to you for future use. Most printers maintain earlier versions of software so they can keep client files in their original version, but not all printers are so conscientious. So it's worthwhile to mention that you're using an earlier version than the current release in the marketplace. If you're one version behind them in InDesign or Illustrator, they can save your file to an earlier version. You know, if you were, and none of you should be this many steps behind, but you know, some people are still working off of the old Creative Suite before it was the Creative Cloud, because they purchased it and they put it on their machine and they are not upgrading. So I believe that the last version of the Creative Suite, which was, again, you bought it on disc, was CS4. And technically, I believe you can still save an InDesign CC file to CS4, but you can't go as far back as CS2. That highway no longer exists. But again, none of you should have this problem. The only problems I can foresee are people who are still running maybe Adobe CC 2018 and they haven't upgraded to 2019. But again, if your printer packages that file to send it back to you, you might not be able to open up the InDesign file, the INDD file, but you can open up the IDML file that they've sent you. That one is, you know, kind of a legacy InDesign file. So again, you know, just discuss this with your printer. You know, if you're one of those people who is never going to upgrade, this is going to end up being an issue for you. Just be aware of that. And you may have to perform any corrections on the files yourself, you know, earlier versions of the software, and then submit new corrected files to your printer. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also, there may be platform issues. You know, generally speaking, it's preferable to keep a job on one platform throughout its lifespan. While sending files across platforms is not a major undertaking as it once was, and it used to be a major undertaking. It used to be that PCs couldn't open up the Mac version of InDesign files, but Macs could open up the PC version of InDesign files. It made no sense. It really seemed like most of the issues were on the Windows end. You know, we don't run into that anymore, but one of the things that we might still run into, again, are those font issues. So if you're using all OpenType fonts, there's really no need to worry. That's what OpenType fonts were made for. But if you're using a PostScript or a TrueType font on Windows and your printer is Mac only, you should insist on submitting your job in PDF format. Most Macs will be able to open up those fonts, but sometimes they just don't work correctly. So while there may be Mac fonts with the same name as your window fonts, again, they might not necessarily be identical in terms of font metrics. So there might be some text reflow that happens as a result of opening the job on a Mac. Remember what I was saying about all the different Helveticas and the different Futuras out there? That can happen. Most printers sensibly keep Windows files in their native habitat for this reason. If you're using Windows, it's just worth mentioning this concern early in your discussion with the CSR. That's your customer service rep. All right, send in the files. Finally, we're ready to send them to the printer. So scary. It's always the scariest part. I've been doing this for 20 years, and sending the file to the printer is always the scariest part. I just finished up a business card design today, and I sent it off to the printer. And even though it has been proofed by me multiple times, it has been proofed by my client multiple times, we all feel great about it. As soon as I sent that file off, I went, oh, just like that, because that's always how you feel. Oh, it's out of my hands. You want to, though, once you finally get to that step, you want to ask your printer about how they prefer that you submit those files to them. If they provide a way of submitting files via FTP, which is short for File Transfer Protocol, they'll give you directions for accessing the correct target directory. Use a file compression program to zip and consolidate the job into a single archive and to reduce the amount of data that you're uploading. All right, note that both Mac OS X and Windows, they both have built-in file compression utilities. We use them all the time to upload our work to Canvas. On the Mac, you would select the file and right-click or control-click and select compress from the menu that appears. In Windows, it's pretty much the same exact thing. Select the folder, right-click, and select Send to Compressed folder. And the utility will then create a compressed folder or a compressed archive of the folder and its contents. So CDs and DVDs, they used to be the most common way of transporting files. However, new computers do not have a CD or DVD drive anymore. Check your Mac. Do you have a CD or DVD drive? Chances are you don't. I have an older laptop. My laptop, I think, is from 2013. So this baby's like 6 years old. And it doesn't have a CD or a DVD drive anymore because we just don't use them. So because of this, your printer's probably going to have an FTP portal for direct file submission. Keep that in mind. If they are insisting that they need a DVD, you can probably FTP it over to Staples or Office Max and ask them to burn it to a DVD for you. But I've yet to run into a printer that needs a DVD from you. All right, in addition to the files themselves, it's really helpful if you provide these collateral materials to your print service provider as well. Your contact information, along with any alternate contacts, such as other members of your design team or appropriate client contacts if you're acting as an intermediary. Don't give your client's contact if you're the person that you want them to contact in the if there's a problem. If you have a very panicky client and there's, something weird, like you have that one font that's showing up missing, but it's really that empty character that you forgot to delete, you probably don't want them calling your client over that, thinking that something's gone wrong with their project. So again, be very wary of actually giving out your client's contact information to the printer. You probably want them to go directly through you. Give your printer a comprehensive mock-up of the job if there's anything tricky about the final piece, such as inserts or folded out panels. If you want it folded a certain way, give them examples to follow. The more comprehensive of an example, the better. Again, it's just covering your own behind. All right, proofs and press checks. Here we go. Whew, we sent our work to the printer. So these are the things that we're going to go over. Use a checklist. We're going to discuss hard proofs and soft proofs, press checks, looping clients in on the costs and changes after going to print. So you sent the printer your files and they're now out of your hands. Scary, right? It's always scary for me every single time. Once a project goes to press, you're gonna be able to review either a hard proof, which is a physical proof or a printout, or a soft digital proof, which might come in the form of a PDF. You may be able to even request to do a press check to review it while it's running on press. And you'll check for different things at each of these phases. First though, make sure your client is informed that changes made by the printer during the proof or the press phases cost money, a lot of money. That is not the time to be doing changes. Clients need to be thorough in their review of all the content before the files are handed off to the printer. Make them sign off on it for you. Additionally, a detailed design review before handoff is a must. So you're gonna need to make some checklists here. Make a checklist for yourself and a checklist for your client before you send anything to the printer. Your first checklist should be a before you hand this off to the printer list. Number 1, print and mock up your final piece at full size so you can review the design. Make sure any guidelines or graphics that should not print are on a separate layer. So that might be score lines, die lines, things like that. Sometimes you're going to, I used to have to set things up to go to an envelope printer because we had custom envelopes being made. And I needed to place the graphic, but I also needed to place a separate layer which showed where the score lines and the die lines were on the envelope. So when the printer looked at the PDF, they could see the mock-up of it, open up my file, and just turn that die line and score line off before they sent it to have the plates made. But they wanted it set up that way. So that's why I sent it that way. Do a spell check. Double check for those extra spaces. Make sure your punctuation is correct. If you need to, copy and paste all of the text into Microsoft Word. Check for grammatical errors. Look for anything underlined in green or red that you might have missed because you've looked at it so many times. Send the final design to your client one more time for a sign-off before sending it to the press. Tell them, scream it from the rooftops, this is their last chance to make any changes before they start getting charged by the printer. Make sure there's no cropping or cutting off that's occurring in linked images. Make sure you've converted those images to CMYK and make sure each pixel-based image is at least 300 DPI. If you're sending a PDF, convert your text to outlines. If you're sending a collected InDesign or Illustrator file, include a high-resolution PDF go by for quick reference by your printer. Remove any unused color swatches in your file. This might be something that you don't think about, but if your job is a spot color job, there shouldn't be any CMYK swatches that remain in your palette. And if your job is a CMYK job, there shouldn't be any spot colors other than those that are designated in those finishings that should remain. So what are those finishings that I'm talking about? That goes back to if you had to have that layer that had the guidelines, like the score lines or the die lines, sometimes those show up in a spot color, and that's on purpose as well, that we do it that way. Then package those files using the package function in InDesign. This quickly packages your fonts and your images used in the document for accurate linking by your printer. It also will notify you if there's anything problematic that's happening. And then your second checklist should be for your printer proof. So you're going to want to double check again for any possible typos, extra spaces, correcting that punctuation, any missing characters. Check the quality of linked images and vector graphics. Nothing should be fuzzy on your printer's proof. Check that all the fonts were loaded and they're displaying correctly. When things default, they tend to default to Courier a lot of times, which is that typewriter font. And that really does stand out on a page if it's not supposed to be there. So make sure that you're double checking all of that. Make sure there's no cropping that's occurring on those linked images. And what I mean by cropping is I'm going to show a quick example here. If you have an image, let me open up this. I know this had a whole bunch of images on it. And maybe, you know, your logo. What I mean by cropping is make sure that the box for your logo somebody didn't accidentally close it like this and part of your logo is missing. That's that cropping that's not correct on those linked images. You know, you want to double check everything, because all it takes is one person accidentally opening up your InDesign file and moving something and it can go wrong. So, you know, keep that in mind, you know, when you're double checking everything. That's really what you want to keep in mind. If you're reviewing a color proof check, check for color accuracy. Does it look correct? Are those the colors that you picked? You know, there could be some slight variation, again, from monitor to monitor or from your home printer to their printer. That's going to happen. But if it's a wildly different color, you want to see why that's happening and you want to fix that. Check for any missing elements. Again, you know, even if all of your images are CMYK, everything was set up appropriately. When that plate was ripped, I have seen things just fall off for no reason whatsoever, because it's an archaic PC, something corrupted when the PDF file was ripping, and a logo fell off. And nobody knows why, and it's nobody's fault, but you want to make sure that you're checking for that. Review the format. You know, are pages in the correct order? Are the folds in the correct place? Did it, you know, if you're having a barrel fold, where is that cover laying when it's been folded? Is the cover on top? It shouldn't be on the inside acting as the bottom flap. It needs to be on top. So again, check for all of those things. Check if any captions, table of contents, page numbers, make sure that they are all corresponding correctly. Make sure the edges of your photographs fully touch their outlined containers. Make sure your bleeds extend to the edge and past the edge. You don't want to get that white line, right? If you have something and it's set up correctly as a bleed, and when you get that proof back from the printer, and it has, you know, a white edge around it, something was not done correctly. You know, you are going to be sometimes the last set of eyes for your client. All right, the third checklist, this one's going to occur during the press check. So you're going to want to check the paper. Make sure it's correct. Make sure it matches, you know, that stock and that weight that you picked out when you met with your printer so many moons ago when you were discussing this project, Make sure it matches those final specifications. Is that the paper that you chose? It's one of those things where you might not think to grab it and to feel it, but if you have the book, compare it to the book, make sure it's the same. Check for color accuracy in images and solid colors. If you're printing a spot color piece, compare your PMS swatches to the printed sheet. Also, you're going to want to verify color consistency from page to page, especially with offset printing. If the pressman did not put the ink on correctly, that really can mess something up. You know, it might, the color might be too dark at the beginning. start to even out towards the middle. But if he or she wasn't watching the ink on the printer, it could then begin to get lighter towards the end. So you really want to check and make sure that there's color accuracy throughout and it's consistent from page to page. If your piece is a full color process, review those ink registrations. Cyan, magenta, and yellow and black, they should all hit in the same spot. If the papers seem to shift on the press, that's how things can start to look fuzzy because it's not matched up. You want to let the pressman know. Check large areas of solid color for even coverage. It should be, it should be even throughout across the entire spectrum. Make sure there aren't any unwanted marks or scratches appearing, or just some blemishes where the ink didn't cover correctly. You're going to want to check that. And then bring your final proof and verify that all of the text is consistent with the approved proof and that all of the changes that were made are current. Make sure that dot gain is not occurring. This is when the ink may be too heavy in certain areas, which can cause thin lines or small type to start to close in. Think of the letter E or the letter O. They're supposed to have, an open area there. So you want to double check that. Make sure it's not vanishing. And, be prepared to stay for the full review of a multi-page piece that may be, more than one press run. Press checks, they can be as quick as an hour, or they can be as long as 8 hours collectively over the course of multiple days. So you really need to keep that in mind if you're going to do one of those press checks. And remember, the press check is not the time to start checking for typos. If you have to cancel a press run or update a plate due to a typo, that might be possible, but it's going to be extremely expensive. You are now halting production on both your work and all of the jobs behind you. So you got to think about that. They might not let you do that. You also need to determine who's going to be paying for this before you make a decision to fix something at that point, because it's going to be extremely, extremely expensive. So again, this is why it is so important that we are just so particular when we send send stuff off. And this is why we should be this particular when we are submitting our work. I always say to my students when I teach, pretend I'm your client. Pretend I am the press. What if you sent that file to me and it was completely wrong? And it got to the press and I put the wrong plates up and I printed it for your client and now it's wrong. You might have to pay for that. That can be a lot of money out of your pocket. And if you mess something like that up, your client might not come back to you. So you want to do everything you can. There's going to be times where there's going to be errors. It happens. But anything that you can do to ensure that it's not happening, make sure that you do it. All right, so let's take a look at assessment 4. We actually have a final quiz this week. So let's hop on over to that in the course. I always want to tell my students, you also have that career integration quiz, which is different from your final quiz. It's worth 15 points. Make sure you do that each mod. Don't forget to do that. Get all the points you can, right? So here's how the final quiz goes. It's worth 35 points. There are 11 questions, and your time limit is none. If you aren't sure of an answer, please go back, open up a new tab, and go back to the readings and videos and try to find the answer. Please, take your time, get the most points possible. Your objectives for this course are going to be on differentiating between additive and subtractive color models. We went over that in week 1. Differentiating between spot, Pantone, RGB, and CMYK color models. We also went over that in week 1. Defining primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Week 1, tints, tones, and shades of color. We actually kind of just went over that today. Identifying the following color schemes: complementary, triadic, analogous, split complementary, and monochromatic. Also, week 1, identifying and applying correct resolution for print output. We went over that all 4 weeks. Discussing the role that color plays in the big 4 design principles: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. This is in your readings and videos. Going over the CRAP principles. It is in week 2. So make sure that you go into the course media tab and you can see what week each thing shows up in. So week 2, I think I scrolled too far. Oh, week 1, here we go. Week 2. It is, oh, maybe they moved it up to week 1. There we go. All right. Yep. It's one of your beginning graphic design color videos. It's 6 minutes and 32 seconds. It goes over contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, the big 4 design principles. And this was in week 1. Distinguishing the similarities and differences between raster images and vector graphics. Remember, raster images, those are your photographs. Those are anything that is created in Photoshop. That is, that's pixel based. That is your raster image. Anything that you create in Illustrator is a vector graphic. Those would be your logos. Maybe you created some clip art that was a vector graphic. Again, anything created in Illustrator is vector. Anything created in Photoshop is raster. We're going to talk, it's going to go over setting up margins, gutters, and bleeds in a document for correct pre-press output. You went over that in week 3 when you were setting up your trifold. You had to set up your margins, your gutters, your bleeds. We had to set up bleeds correctly in weeks 2 and 3. Margins correctly in weeks 2 and 3. But we really got into those gutters and being extremely specific with our margins in week 3. And then creating a packaged print-ready press file. That is a package file. Again, file package has everything that you need, all the links, all the fonts. Your documents are in there. And then a print-ready press file. That is a press file, a PDF file that has your crop and bleed marks. So again, this quiz is based on the readings, the videos, and the classwork that you completed this mod. Be really careful to read the questions. But to discourage cheating, some questions are going to seem like others, but the values have changed or what's being asked has changed. So you and your fellow students are not going to get the same quiz. Be sure you know what the question is asking for and the values to use. Again, there are 11 questions and it's not timed. If you feel as though something might have gone wrong with the quiz, please let your instructor know sooner rather than later. And I believe you get 1 shot at this quiz. So, please do take your time. All right. So we went over so many different things this mod. I want to thank you for, sitting through all of these pre-recorded videos. I sure hope that you got something out of them. I love discussing print production and color theory with you. I hope that came through, and I really hope that you had some fun with your assignments this mod. These are some great portfolio pieces that you are creating in DES 114. Upload them to your Behance page. Another suggestion that I have for you is mock them up. before you send them to your Behance page. If you go to your Creative Cloud, you actually have access to some great assets that you can use to mock up, you know, your trifold, to mock up your sign. Just do a quick search for trifold. And you can see how you can mock it up for placement. Again, just a little something extra when you're sending it up to your Behance page to make it really stand out. I think that that's great. You can put your sign in a sign. They do have at least one good one that will work with this assignment. I gotta just find it for you. This one kind of works, but you got to be really aware of taking out the background. It can get a little bit weird there. Pexels actually has a great sign available that you can use for mock-up. And then Poster. This is a good one. I like this one in the frame on the wall, or this one on the frame on the floor. Again, you know, just something a little bit extra to make your portfolio stand out. And the Pexels sign I was thinking of, it's kind of funny because it's a sign out in the wilderness, but it's the dimensions are great. Let me just see. It's a plain white sign like in front of trees, and I've used it to mock up in this course before. So again, just, you know, it's a little something extra that you can do. Watch, I'll never find it now. Again, Pexels has some great options for mocking things up as well. Feel, oh, that's a billboard. I might need to be a little bit more specific. Let me try. I know it was a white sign. If I put white sign in woods, maybe it will come up. But, you know, they have, again, you know, some great options that might actually, I might have already downloaded it and I can show it to you. That might be easier. Well, maybe last time I wasn't able to find it. That's why I did it on the other ones. But again, you know, just try to do something to make your portfolio pieces stand out a little bit more. You know, mocking them up is a great way to, you know, to do that. And you can just upload, you know, to your Behance portfolio, you know, just a JPEG. But, you know, oh, it's this one. It's actually this one. I usually crop out where it says toilet and I make it white and I put our Aqua Excursions there. And honestly, this is the correct dimensions for an Aqua Excursion sign. And it's just kind of funny because it's this sign out in the middle of the wilderness. But hey, if you're going kayaking, why not? Maybe that's a fun place to go. So again, I really hope that you enjoyed this course, and good luck and have fun with your final projects. Have a great end of the mod, everyone.